When you look at Ethereum, it's a bit more like the network effects, connectivity, and the base layer for computation, which starts to remind, like that's a bit like you would say, what would be the vision for the internet? That's why we also have to talk about this one 2-year vision and just say it so clearly. Protocol mainnet is the Ethereum Foundation role, and we scale L1, we scale blobs, and we improve the interop and UX just to show that network effect on the journey.
Builders that they want to build something, they should choose Ethereum because it's the most secure, it's the most robust, should be the default for them. Want to improve the UX in order to don't even need to be aware of blockchain exists in the app. So I think it takes some time to improve our wallet system, and it takes some time to provide a very good pipeline for the app layer to improve the UX. But I think this world won't be too far away.
We increase the L1 block space and still the fees are low, so why would you do that? Clearly, this is a commitment to the future, so everyone can be very confident that L1 will scale, so we can build on L1, we can build more L2s, that we are very safe building an L2 that we plan to scale 8 times, 16 times, 30 times over the years, and L1 will always be there and will be the best platform to launch L2. So.
Welcome to Epicenter, the show which talks about the technologies, projects, and people driving decentralization and the blockchain revolution. I'm Friederike Ernst, and today I'm speaking with Tomasz Stańczak and Hsiao-Wei Wang, who are both the new co-executive directors at the Ethereum Foundation. So Tomasz previously founded a company named Nethermind that builds infrastructure in the Ethereum space, including a very well-respected client, and Hsiao-Wei has been a researcher with the Ethereum Foundation for ages, actually. And you both have come in kind of after a period of unrest from the Ethereum community earlier this year. So kind of I'm super interested to kind of hear your visions for how the Ethereum Foundation will evolve over the next coming years. But before we dive into that, let me tell you about our sponsors this week.
If you're looking to stake your crypto with confidence, look no further than Chorus One. More than 150,000 delegators, including institutions like BitGo, Pantera Capital, and Ledger, trust Chorus One with their assets. They support over 50 blockchains and are leaders in governance on networks like Cosmos, ensuring your stake is responsibly managed. Thanks to their advanced MEV research, you can also enjoy the highest staking rewards. You can stake directly from your preferred wallet, set up a white label node, restake your assets on EigenLayer or Symbiotic, or use their SDK for multi-chain staking in your app. Learn more at chorus.one and start staking today.
This episode is proudly brought to you by Gnosis, a collective dedicated to advancing a decentralized future. Gnosis leads innovation with Circles, Gnosis Pay, and Metri, reshaping open banking and money. With Hashi and Gnosis VPN, they're building a more resilient, privacy-focused internet. If you're looking for an L1 to launch your project, Gnosis Chain offers the same development environment as Ethereum with lower transaction fees. It's supported by over 200,000 validators, making Gnosis Chain a reliable and credibly neutral foundation for your applications. Gnosis DAO drives Gnosis governance, where every voice matters. Join the Gnosis community in the Gnosis DAO forum today. Deploy on the EVM-compatible Gnosis chain or secure the network with just one GNO and affordable hardware. Start your decentralization journey today at gnosis.io.
Hsiao-Wei and Tomasz, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Pleasure.
The honor is mine. So maybe before we kind of dive into Ethereum Foundation stuff, tell us about kind of like how you guys got here respectively. So kind of like what brought you kind of like to the chair you're sitting on this present day?
Yeah, sure. So for me, it was almost 8 years journey. 2017 when Nethermind, when I started Nethermind. Before that, actually, I joined like the Ethereum space of like reading and learning in 2015, 16. So I was observing some of the big events of that time. And in the first 3 years at Nethermind, it was me mostly building with a small group of people at Nethermind, implementation of Ethereum client. Fast forward a few years, I went through, DeFi summer, all the various events after the long crypto winter, collaborated with Flashbots and MEV Solutions research since around 2021, like more or less the beginning of Flashbots, and also worked with Ethereum Foundation, built a twin stake, institutional staking, worked on the Euler DeFi project, and collaborated with Forte. So various projects, always more or less related to our work at Nethermind. And through Nethermind, I got the start conversation with Ethereum Foundation. I started this year in March. Joined Hsiao-Wei, and now we're here.
Cool. What about you, Hsiao-Wei?
Yeah, I joined the Ethereum Foundation in 2017. Before that, my background is computer science, and then when I joined the EF, I was working on the Sharding POC, the Sharding proof of concept. That was very, very aged design. And yeah, so the time I joined the research team, that was the small team, and we were working on the consensus protocol mostly. And during the time, like the EF, the research team has changed a lot. I mean, by years, our focus keep expanding to multiple different domains. And EF also changed a lot during the past 7 years. And then I was a consensus R&D co-lead with Danny Ryan for multiple years. And then last year, I shift my role from researcher to leadership at the Ethereum Foundation. And then, this year, recently, 1 month ago, I honored to be the co-executive director with Tomasz.
How did this kind of shape up? Kind of like, were you approached by Vitalik or kind of Aya to kind of see whether you'd be up for this, or kind of like, there was no open application, right? So kind of like, how did you guys become co-executive directors?
Yeah, I guess for Hsiao-Wei, it was maybe a simpler story. She was already in. So on my side, I talked to Aya for the first time, I think, last year in September in Singapore around Token 2049. But then we discussed in general the challenges ahead of EF, the leadership situation after Danny's departure, and we discussed talent management, various topics. So it's a longer conversation, but we didn't discuss at all like me joining EF, and I didn't think of it. I was obviously super busy with Nethermind and various other projects. And then as I was observing all the situations online around the leadership challenges, still I didn't think of me joining EF. But I was just thinking of like who will be there, how it will affect the future of various ecosystem players, Nethermind, how Nethermind will position itself in all of this. But I had already at that time like various discussions running with Aya, Vitalik, some of them around CERT, some of them around some enterprise solutions, and I reached out asking some questions. And then when Aya asked if we could have a conversation about the leadership topic again, and the few meetings, interviews, discussions, meeting with the management team, meeting with Hsiao-Wei when we spent a few days together to understand how we could collaborate, meeting with the rest of the management team, Bastian, Josh, Julian. So all of that, and then gradually we agreed that. So there was lots of discussions about how to deal with the situation with like Nethermind, conflicts of interest, how I will collaborate with Foundation. Lots of discussions. Then joining the Ethereum Foundation offsite to get that like soft introduction to the entire team and see what is the reception, whether people feel comfortable with that in the context of all the challenges of this joint leadership and my position. And I think that we were pretty comfortable with announcing it. So that's the story.
And for you, Hsiao-Wei, it was more of a natural transition, right?
More natural, but it was also not that long-term planned. I would have,
Yeah.
I can openly to say it is like, but Aya did have. So Aya is now the president of the Ethereum Foundation board. Yeah, she has this idea of like to have some transition more than 1 year ago. So, but during just the EF internal, we have so many things to do. So, she didn't able. She couldn't make it to be happen earlier. But last year we have several conversation around like what EF could be like, and then this conversation help us to think more about like, okay, Ethereum 2025, we want to some internal change and how it can impact the ecosystem better, and so such discussion triggered us to form a new leadership system in the Ethereum Foundation. So yeah, I think the story is like what Tomasz described it, and then our combination is like before this there were some choices that the leadership has been thinking about, but afterward I also participate in some discussion, but it's not my decision there. But afterward, I do believe that this combination is the best for everyone and at EF and also like for the ecosystem.
Cool. You guys are coming in at a somewhat difficult moment, right? So kind of, I think it's well known that Ethereum has got an amazing technical community, right? So I think there's no other network that is as resilient in terms of client development and kind of plurality and kind of network decentralization and so on. So kind of like, I mean, Tomasz, you know this kind of like as a client developer, kind of there's no kind of like any kind of piece of code that goes in a client is kind of like is scrutinized by probably 20 very capable people, and kind of this cannot be said for all networks, right? So kind of like this is kind of like this level of scrutiny for kind of like open source software is really rare. So Ethereum really has that going for it. But kind of if you look at how the general blockchain ecosystem has evolved over the past years, kind of other chains have outpaced Ethereum in terms of throughput and usage, and kind of they can do things at a lower cost per transaction. So I think kind of a lot of the unrest that was kind of like in the community was from this perceived lack of vision. I think there were kind of like some very, I mean, there's always kind of like this very loud kind of Ethereum is money kind of crew that I don't think kind of who are clamoring for more marketing and so on. And I don't think that's actually the thing. So kind of I think kind of like but a clear vision as to how to shape up Ethereum over the coming years. This is something that was clearly lacking. And in part, this is also owed to kind of like how the Ethereum Foundation kind of saw itself, right? And it's kind of sees itself as a steward, kind of as an enabler, but not as a commander. So kind of like other ecosystem foundations don't see themselves that way. They kind of say, this is the, I don't know, Solana roadmap now implemented. So while in a very broad sense, kind of Ethereum remains technically unmatched, usage kind of tells a somewhat more mixed story. So I would kind of like to use this hour to kind of talk with you guys about kind of like how we kind of reconcile that, and kind of like how you guys are seeing that in terms of, you know, future for the Ethereum Foundation and Ethereum as a large kind of, yeah. So maybe let's start off with kind of the role of the Ethereum Foundation. So kind of the Ethereum Foundation kind of, it sees itself as an enabler, not a commander, but it is also the main funder for research, right? So kind of like how do you see the Ethereum Foundation's role evolving?
You say that we are the main funding source for research. And even within the Ethereum ecosystem, I think that's much more complex situation, like positively much more complex. There are fantastic researchers at Ethereum Foundation, and it's definitely there's lots of funding delegated to that research that is within the EF, and through various academic grants and collaborations with other players in the ecosystem. But then you look around, and there are fantastic researchers at multiple teams all around. So there are researchers at the L2 teams, a fantastic level of ZK research that is in Ethereum ecosystem, MEV research that leaves all the other ecosystems behind. If you think about the quality of execution, the quality of market mechanisms that we have on Ethereum, then you have the researchers on engineering, scaling everywhere in all the different client teams. And the funding sources for those are really diverse. So you have fantastic VC capital coming to Ethereum and still favoring Ethereum as the best of the chains and the best of the ecosystems. This also grants from various foundations that are independent of Ethereum Foundation. I think that we see some DAOs, places like Gnosis, that have a lot of support for much of the Ethereum values that are like the same, aligned between all those different organizations, because we believe in these values of privacy, security, open source, censorship resistant chain, to bring it to users around the world. So now, if we think that we deliver that message of the direction of a strategy of scaling L1, scaling blobs, improving UX and interop, it's still not something that is imposed on the ecosystem by Foundation, that we just invented it internally and said to people, this is what we're doing now. This is a result of the hundreds of conversations with the ecosystem, of listening through the social media channels, through forums, through Telegram channels, groups, conversations at the events, listening to everyone and understanding those voices in depth. Why this request? Why these challenges? Why the crisis? If there is crisis, what are the opportunities? And then just extracting the essence of all of this and communicating it clearly. So becoming this coordinator, communicator, the voice that many people are looking at to listen where we go together. So it's still the steward role and an enabler role, but it's still the ecosystem that is very decentralized and still very aligned or unified in the vision and values that connect us.
I think the EF's role is resilient to the conditions in the ecosystem, and it is dynamic changes over time. So like we do have research, a strong research team. We do have some focus team, features team in the EF, like technical team. This team should be targeting on the most important topic that no one else is working on right now. And I think the EF would never stop like to empower other people to do more, but just for efficiency and for what make the best impact in time, then the EF would focus on multiple things. And also, I feel like the EFs, Tomasz and I, in our turn, like we will like the EF to be more opinionated to some specific topics. Like EFs is neutral, credible to as a coordinator to help steward the ecosystem, but like the things we wanted to value, or like the technical strategies, like we want to target sooner. That things we will not getting slowed by upticks too much in the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, you both make extremely valid points in that kind of like the Ethereum community is so strong, also in part because the Ethereum Foundation never played this kind of dictator-like role in saying, look, this is the roadmap, now follow it. But I think kind of like having some sort of North Star or vision to kind of focus the efforts from the community. This is really important because otherwise kind of like it's too scattered and it doesn't really come together. So I totally understand that it's a difficult line to toe, kind of how to focus these smart and independent teams into kind of a coherent vision, but without kind of like letting them run off kind of like completely in everyone's direction, right? Kind of like, so yeah, I'm 100% with you on that, and I think it's very it's also important to kind of be extremely mindful of the ecosystem we have, right? So with kind of like 2 executive directors in place, how will you guys kind of divvy it up? Will you just talk everything out, or kind of will you kind of say this is your domain and this is my domain, or how will this work going forward?
Yeah, I think it's very regular, but at the same time, it's regular in the sense that we have conversations all the time, but without some predetermined time. So I think it's casual conversation, collaboration on multiple topics, very natural splitting of responsibilities, because I think both of us are just willing to pick up whatever is needed to be addressed. So I think it's like we are able to rely on each other. There's been conversations and collaboration that was very, very fruitful so far, without any problems. And yeah, sometimes it's just 2 or 3 hours conversations on various topics, internal or external, on strategy, on vision. Sometimes I'm a bit chaotic with talking about the vision internally at the show. I just like converse it to some super distilled and clear communication. Sometimes we split some of the policies and procedures. Hsiao-Wei has fantastic understanding of the internal organization of the foundation. It's we're both super aligned to like things related to budgets, to structure of the organization. I take advantage of the fact that I'm traveling all the time and talking to a lot of people. So big aspect of communicating through the meetings, reaching out to community ecosystem partners, traditional finance institutions. And this is definitely very often my role, but I think in Asia, Hsiao-Wei is much more active. Hsiao-Wei, probably you have much to add here.
Yeah, I think as Tomasz described it, like, and this mutual, transparent communication is important. I think we're very happy to involve each other to the different conversations, with other peoples, and then at the same time, like, we usually would say, okay, this topic, okay, we're both involved, but when there's some timing decision needs to be made, maybe one of us, you do it or I do it, and it's usually very simply, then we will divide the duty. And then, the whole process, the whole collaboration is like a divide and conquer. Like, I recently working on some like treasury management stuff, and then Tomasz working on some like hiring, like the hiring team establishment, things like that. So then we have different domains, but it's like also for the most important topics, we will make decision together. I think this division would happen naturally.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a very symbiotic kind of relationship where kind of you talk a lot of things out and then kind of assign responsibilities kind of ad hoc or kind of like in a more structured way. Fantastic. So kind of we've talked about kind of like how you guys kind of work together. Maybe let's talk about kind of this notion of narrative leadership. So kind of like there have been kind of a number of different ideas of what Ethereum is and what Ethereum should be, kind of like ranging from kind of like the world computer to kind of money, essentially. How have you guys aligned on kind of like which of these visions to support and to kind of build towards?
Yeah, I think the Ethereum has this aspect of plurality of visions. So we like when you look at the IS and Vitalik's document, it really draws the vision for Ethereum and the values. It really reminds the values of Ethereum, and we keep reminding them. That's all about privacy, security, open source access, censorship resistance on the chain, on the protocol. So they within a plurality of visions, I think that many people proposed over many years, like directions, which were either specific of what they were building or specific of the times of various challenges in the Ethereum space, right? So we were talking about word computer, and I think this word computer with AI is still something that very much resonates with what we're building. There were discussions about ultrasound at the global settlement, and I think for when we talk about DeFi and L2s and enterprise, that global settlement layer really has the great meaning and remains very important for Ethereum. And then you had also the visions of really like pure ultra decentralization, and many people who fight for privacy, decentralization, for like maximal censorship resistance are very important for the vision of Ethereum. All of that matters. And I think some other aspects of it are very often realized by many L2s. And I feel that for particular North Stars that are slightly more narrow scope, this for L2s define their North Stars and compete for many of the L1s. So you can look at many alternative L1s to Ethereum. Really, for us, are competing with the leading top L2s that are now scaling, distributing Ethereum values, and reusing what L1 provides as a platform, as a base for them. Now, for Ethereum, I myself see this like both computer with AI, but general like open, autonomous solution for the entire world economy. This is very broad, and I think that it's really showing like how grandiose, how big scale of the Ethereum vision is. But when we talk about the vision that's that broad, it's a bit harder to tell people like how do you act within it. Like they have to find their own path, and maybe for very customizable special L2s, this is a bit easier. So they can go there and see, okay, this is the aspect of that world economy, world autonomous computer that I want to build. When you look at Ethereum, it's a bit more like the network effects, connectivity, the base layer for computation, for access to data and computation and coordination and the ledger, everything together, which starts to remind, like that's a bit like you would say, what would be the vision for the internet? Yes, it was connecting people, but then you would say, oh, is it just about connecting people or connecting systems or connecting machines, or is it about the network? Is it about the financial system? And I think with Ethereum, it's also very much visible. It's a coordination, it's finance, and then particular challenges appear. But that's why we also have to talk about this one tier vision and say it so clearly. Now we think about protocol mainnet is the Ethereum Foundation role, and we scale L1, we scale blobs, and we improve the interop and UX just to show that network effect on the journey.
So, but kind of like if I kind of distill this into kind of like one kind of punchy byline, kind of it would be kind of utility over number go up. Is that fair?
It's the impact and winning for sure. I mean, like when we talk about the values, we know that the values would not have that impact without really winning and showing that you can get adoption, you can onboard users, you can connect systems, you can get network effects. Is it utility in a sense is like benefits for the users globally, impacting everyone's lives in a positive way and in a way that they themselves define for themselves what positive means, right? Like, so not someone defining top down of what really is good or bad for other people. So when you start talking too much about utility, then maybe you lose that neutrality of the protocol. And by just essentially we have to think about Ethereum as being everywhere and connecting everything, so it can be neutral. Because if you exclude some aspects of the economy, some aspects of automation, some aspects of that word computer, then you're no longer neutral. Because like, how did you end up with that decision of what is excluded? Like, why didn't you connect everything? And yeah, in this sense, that utility arrives with everyone who builds on top of Ethereum. And scaling Ethereum makes sure that that utility can be immediately accessible, available, and that people want to build more on Ethereum.
Yeah, I hear that. Kind of, you're already alluding to kind of the different L2s that kind of live on top of Ethereum. Maybe let's talk about this for a while, because I think this is one of the really difficult problems for Ethereum right now. So kind of there's this number of ecosystems that kind of live on top of Ethereum that are often, usually, pretty insular, that are not well connected to each other or to Ethereum, in fact. And in some sense, they could even be kind of described as somewhat parasitic, because kind of like they kind of take transaction volume away from Ethereum, and often they don't actually kind of they kind of proclaim the Ethereum values, but often they don't really see them through, right? So kind of if you're in a situation where essentially you have a centralized sequencer, you have exactly one party building blocks, right? This is very much against the spirit of kind of like openness and resilience and permissionlessness and so on. So how do you navigate that?
I think that's when you say there are situations when you have the rollups claiming to be rollups, and then the question is, who agrees that this is a rollup? Like, anyone can claim it, right? So, well, on one side, you want to have that permissionless aspect of anyone can launch a rollup. On the other hand, you have to provide some guidance of what it means and which rollups are safe, because you care about the security aspect of Ethereum. And the branding of security is important, because the user experience means that you feel comfortable in the ecosystem and you feel that there are some guarantees of security and guarantees that you understand it without understanding all the technical details and without verifying every line of code of every system. Sure, it's the verification maybe is aspect of blockchains in general and the blockchain values, but you also want to have onboarding your users and make it a good UX. So you have L2P. It does the review of the stages of rollups, right? So the stage 0, stage 1, stage 2, that define different like progression of the security of user that moves assets to those rollups. And even if you have centralized sequencer on L2, then the questions are, if that sequencer fails, if there is a liveness failure, will the users be able to withdraw assets back to L1? Like, are their assets safe? So that's why we very often will encourage to mint all the assets on L1 and then bridge them to L2.
Exactly, but that's not
yeah.
how it happens today, right? So kind of like, if you look at, say, for instance, a Base ecosystem, almost all the assets that kind of like are traded on Base are actually minted on Base. And kind of like this idea of kind of like withdrawing to L1, this only works if kind of like all assets are natively minted on L1, right? You can't withdraw a native L2 asset back to L1.
Yeah, so I think there'll be much more guidance on those aspects. So for many high value assets, when you see the real world assets, the stable coins and so on, there are multiple approaches. Like, so you can have situation when you really rely on issuer and say that they are the guarantees of the of your security of assets, what will happen if there is some failure. At the same time, I'm absolutely convinced that any large institution that is issuing on blockchain want to avoid any failures, even if they can later have some kind of social consensus or the corporate or legal way of resolving the situation. They will not want to ever observe it with their customers. Like, their customers will be really disappointed if there's any failure that you cannot resolve entirely on chain with this like transparent on chain way. So that's why we see a lot of those assets being actually minted on L1. And this is like the high value funds that go for Ethereum, and then they bridge to L2s with a lot of restrictions and verification. For many of the tokens, meme coins, that's like fun exploration. There you have situations when the minting obviously happen on L2. But even then, like when you have larger L2 protocols with larger liquidity, I think that the situation in the future will be very clear that you may have this risk-seeking capital that will keep reaching to L2s, but will be coming back to L1 for the time of safety. And for every single like operator, like the capital provider, they'll have some percentage of assets being in that safe zone, settlement zone of L1, which means that when you look at globally at the entirety of the economy, L1 will be the space of the settlements of the largest like liquidity source that you'll be borrowing to more risky escapades in L2s. Also, L2s very often don't have this like a global or neutral vision, so they take some shortcuts, right? Like, so you suggested this one like centralization shortcut, like might be alignment with some particular jurisdictions, right? Some L2s might feel more American, some of them may feel more Chinese, some of them may feel more European, some of them may be targeting particular set of solutions. Maybe some of them will be customized for gaming. Maybe some of them will be targeting some demographic in the way how they market their solution. While Ethereum, for all of them, provides that layer of settlement security and providing a global brand. So once again, when we look at the L2s, we will be opinionated in a way. We'll start talking more about what we expect on the sense of security, what do we expect on branding, when you can claim it's Ethereum Rollup, what we expect of like contribution to the network effects, collaboration on interoperability, on tooling, innovation back to the Ethereum ecosystem, the way we communicate all about interoperability between the L2s and L1s, but also how open those L2s are to collaborate with other L2s. Like so this very interoperable, friendly ecosystem that has some very healthy competition and innovation on user acquisition, altogether will be onboarding to the ecosystem, users and capital. So I think definitely success of L2s brings developers, users, and capital to L1 and increases significantly the demand for the block space on L1. At the same time, we also have to run a bit ahead, deliver that block space that is seemingly like, because now you have questions of we increase the L1 block space and still the fees are low. So why would you do that? Clearly, this is a commitment to the future, so everyone can be very confident that L1 will scale. So we can build on L1, we can build more L2s, that we are very safe building an L2 that we plan to scale 8 times, 16 times, 30 times over the years. And L1 will always be there and will be the best platform to launch L2. So
there's a lot to unpack there. So kind of like I want to talk about kind of like the interplay of different L2s in just a bit. But kind of before we kind of dive into that, let's talk about kind of this idea of Ethereum as kind of a global settlement layer, kind of like how, which is kind of like what you're alluding to, right? So kind of like if you look at Ethereum today, Ethereum processes around 1.5 million transactions per day at the moment, right? So if you look at financial transactions between for instance, banks and large players and so on, which by kind of like your argument should definitely settle on L1, transactions between different L2s, emission of stocks and so on. So I think there's on the order of 50,000 listed stocks worldwide. So kind of like if you want to do a settlement at least once per stock per day, kind of on L1, if you want to kind of register all new stocks on L1, then kind of there's other things like for instance ENS domains, kind of that kind of like, I mean, there's going to be name chain and so on, but in principle kind of like you should be able to kind of have them on L1 if you wanted to. So kind of like, I'm just kind of like, I'm not making myself very clear here, but kind of like if you look at kind of like the global volume of things that kind of like should be settled on L1, 1.5 million transactions per day probably won't cut it. So let's talk about kind of like how to scale that up and what the plans are for scaling L1 block space.
Yeah, sure. So we have planned for 3x of the L1 block space this year. So you could target something around 100 million gas per block this year. So this is mostly done through coordination between the execution clients, verification of like where some additional optimizations are needed, because many of the clients show clearly that they're ready to go there. We see L2s actually using the same technology for scaling their layer. And now the question is, are there some additional bottlenecks around the consensus, coordination, the networking, decentralization of L1 that actually show you differences between how L1 operates and L2 operates? So far, we feel very confident about that growth this year. Then we ask questions about how we go to the next 3x next year, and that you see, like Dangrad proposed those numbers, but they are they're not just out of blue. They are designed based on the conversations with all the clients and understanding what is in the pipeline on the EIPs. So some of the EIPs that will help us, that will ship in Amsterdam, will help the clients to support this further 3x scaling. So you have already like 360 million gas per block next year, and continuation of that. And you mentioned that 1.5 million transactions per day. So this is very often there's like a bit more complex transactions, because when you look at the payments, like the most basic payments, this will be like 10 or 20 million transactions in the current throughput. And as soon as we'll have 60 million, I expect that maybe like in May you have 60 million gas as a block size, the max block size. Coming back to once again to this 1.5 million transactions and all the equity and what you have to have there. So we want to support like all the most valuable identity for people, for agents, for real world assets. Like, so you have real estate, you have the obviously like equities trading, the high value like debt equities, FX trading, where you have maybe transactions of hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. So I clearly remember my work at the like technology for the FX desk at Citibank, and we would look at the time when the non-farm payroll was announced, and you would have this like hundreds of thousands of transactions, and the minimum notional there would be 1 million. Nobody would trade anything below 1 million because this was the ticket size that you would just like use. So whenever you would say one, you meant 1 million. And those transactions were flying and within milliseconds. And you want that to have always the easy path to L1. And those transactions nowadays, I think they cost like this data, good to verify it, but I think like it's between $5 and $25 per million of notional that you have, depending on the markets. It can be less, it can be more, but those are the costs in the traditional finance. And nowadays, when you look at the price of transactions on Ethereum on layer 2s, this is like between 1 cent and $1. But it also means that easily those transactions in the future, they can, first of all, because of all the volumes, when they move to L1, they can feel like any scaling for 10, 100, or 1000x for the next years. And they will always choose L1 first for security, and then for scaling and for the cost reduction, they'll move all the remaining transactions to L2 for scaling. But they'll be settling and keeping the most safe liquidity on L1. And now the question is, how much of this liquidity we can move to the global economy, how secure, how safe they feel. The more L1 scales, the more also L2s can take off all these transactions that are secondary market of the daily trading, right? So all of these movements will take advantage of L1, and L1 will be able to really price those highest value transaction significantly, because there'll be always willingness to pay for the security and safety on the L1. It's just for now we are in the scaling time, in the growth time, in the user onboarding time, showing support for L2s, and the scale is nowhere there to support the entire global economy. But when we go to this like 100x, 1000x multiplied by all the L2s, successful L2s on Ethereum, then you can start talking about this $250 billion of global economy and assets to be very safely transferable to blockchain. And that's why we work on security as well.
That's a really interesting kind of vision for Ethereum, kind of as this almost kind of like how we kind of talked about rollups back in the day, right? Kind of like before they kind of became their own standalone ecosystems, kind of like we thought of them kind of as these liminal spaces where kind of like transactions would be processed and rolled up, and then kind of ultimately kind of everything would come back to Ethereum. So if that's kind of the vision, kind of will kind of the three times scaling and then 3 times scaling again, will those kind of suffice, right? Kind of like there's 8 billion people in the world. So even if you kind of expect everyone to at least kind of like have an identity somewhere, I mean, you should probably tell people like for your most valuable things, like do them on L1. So at least everyone kind of should have an L1 account, right? So that's 8 billion L1 accounts right there. So kind of like, and kind of this is why kind of like way back in the day, and maybe Hsiao-Wei, kind of maybe this is kind of like a question directed at you. So kind of where this kind of idea of sharding initially came in, right? Kind of like, and kind of when we talked about shards back in the day, we thought about kind of like we thought about asynchronously linked shards with their own execution environments and so on. So kind of 1,024 shards of kind of like and scaling Ethereum by a factor of 1,000. Obviously, that would help a lot more than kind of scaling by a factor of 3 and then scaling by a factor of 3 again. So kind of like, and I mean, obviously, this also generalizes. So kind of like you could, yeah. So any ideas to kind of bring that old concept of sharding with kind of like standalone execution environments back?
Short-term plan is no more standalone execution engine to be added for now, but I think you can see the recent the ZK EVM or like RISC-V discussion. Like we never stop to think about what is the better execution engine, and then this will be a long-term plan for the researchers and the developer to investigate more before we have them enough confidence to switch the execution engine this time.
Okay, but it's kind of like it's something that kind of the Ethereum Foundation kind of thinks about.
Yeah, we have many people is working on this topic, and there's also many external, RISC-V, ZK EVM teams are actually prototyping this and product this. But I would say this is part of our focus in the next 5-year plan. Maybe not what we will deliver
Not
in
this
2
year,
years,
but
yeah, it is in our research roadmap.
Fantastic, cool. That's super good to hear. Then maybe let's move on to kind of like the current L2 landscape. So kind of like, Tomasz, you already talked about how L2s and kind of like what calls itself an L2 is very divergent. So kind of I also love L2 beat, but I also think it's somewhat sad that we actually need it, right? So kind of if you look at some, I mean clearly kind of like what level of security you want and need heavily depends on your use case, right? So kind of like as you said, kind of like if you're settling debt with kind of like a minimum order size of $1 million, then kind of like paying $5 or $10 in gas fees is not an issue at all. So kind of, and you should be willing to do that, right? If you're trading in-game assets, that same level of security is probably not needed. I mean, not a gamer, so I won't judge here, but kind of like yeah. So and kind of being very transparent about kind of like what level of security your L2 offers. Probably not so much to users, but kind of to developers who kind of develop on these platforms is really important. And I feel like there's a very wide spectrum of solutions. So kind of like there's kind of like sovereign rollups kind of on one hand, and then there's kind of like Tyco on the other end, which kind of like more or less settles everything to Ethereum. And then kind of like there's things in between with kind of centralized sequences and kind of like then the federation of sequences, and kind of like that there's a question of kind of like whether you can actually escape to L1, whether you can actually have fault proofs and so on, as an escalation mechanism and so on. So I mean, so how and if you look at how the ecosystem currently chooses an L2, kind of as an engineer, really frustrates me that kind of apparently dApp developers don't pay this a lot of attention. There's very high value ecosystems on some L2s that are actually extremely centralized. So how do you explain that? And how do you think there's the need of kind of vocalizing about this more?
Yeah, I mean, yes, you started by saying that it's pity that we need L2 beat, but it feels very natural. I mean, someone takes decision even at the beginning whether they choose Ethereum or other L1 ecosystem, and they look somewhere for that information. Like, it's there, it's available through blog posts, through Twitter or other social media. They can start hearing from friends like, yeah, this is where it's very valuable. That's where the values are. This is where it's safe. But and this is a big plague of the blockchain ecosystems, like the entire industry, that it's really hard to get that information. So every venue like L2B helps a lot. And if you make the system permissionless, then anyone can launch anything without any reputation. And now you seek the information at the beginning of building over time the resilience and trust in the thing, and the trustless thing, right? Trust in the trustless thing that you build over time. So maybe you still have some long range attacks, but you say, okay, this code base was verified many times. Even when we talk about like Bitcoin or Ethereum, we say, look, those systems existed for many years, so are verified, and we feel safer. But if the user comes for the first time to the industry, they need something that will show maybe the list of the ecosystem, say how many years they are in, what's the perception of their safety, what their values are. And it's the same for L2. So it's the same for the DeFi applications. Like if someone deploys a DeFi application on AMM on Ethereum, you'd like to compare them. Like, what is the liquidity there? How they're designed? Do they have immutability or proxies? Do they have like support from the major auditors verifying and confirming that the code base is correct? So I think on every single layer of blockchain, we're looking for this, until we have some like really advanced high quality AI models that can give us that assessment independently of any external provider. So you can launch on your own device, like edge device, AI that will tell you this is safe to use, this is the blockchain to use, this is DeFi to use, this is L2 to use. It's really hard to do it the other way. Developers will choose some ecosystems when they feel they have the best parameters. So like maybe the best users for their particular applications, the best liquidity. What is very important for us is they always feel they will always check like how much of that connection, of like how much of that security and censorship resistance aspect from the L1 they have in the ecosystem. And they can verify it by analyzing the contracts governing the L2 or the design architecture of the L2, or they can check it via L2Beat or other sources that are comparable. And this is aspect of branding of Ethereum. Like if you claim that you're Ethereum rollup, at some point we have to maybe start saying that no, this is not a rollup, or not they are insecure. No, they don't interop with everything else. And if the interoperability improves, and this is a big challenge for us for sure, like this will be a huge effort of the entire ecosystem to bring that good feel of the same tooling, network effects, interoperability, so that those choices maybe are much clearer. It means that it doesn't mean that you'll be always choosing the same L2, but it will be very clear based on your your type of application that you're deploying, where you go, and it will be very clear that you always want that connection with L1. So I think that I was exploring recently a lot of conversations with enterprises, like institutions, traditional finance, and very often they push exactly for the values that we're talking about. They asking about the privacy for the customers. They asking about the censorship resistance, like fair access to the market and no censoring of the financial transactions. They asking for variability and an open source aspect of it. And while they asking for the customizations through that, like they want to have control over some aspects of their internal business processes, internal matching, their customers' interactions through their own L2s. They do ask about L1 that they can allow their customers to venture to have this global neutral market. You don't go now to the institutions that ask for their own L1. Rarely I hear that. They see that there's a huge value in participating in the global economy for Ethereum L1. They have some needs for the L2 for scaling, but they always want to provide a lot of like the transactional processes supported by privacy on L1. So when they support all of this, then we also have even more funding for privacy for users, for retail users. So I see a lot of, and you ask about Taika, like the spectrum, right? So Taika being base rollup and Justin's direction towards the native rollup and base rollup, it's really important. There is lots of optimism from Justin, from others, that look, some of the progress on the ZK VMs, what you see on the if proofs website, you can go there and you can see how all the ZK VMs compete for the performance of proving. All of that shows like a lot of promise that you can accelerate this timeline. Right? So it says 5 years, and this is very reasonable, but we push constantly that there's technology changing, there is AI, it accelerates our research, and it means that we see much more of a progress on ZK than we expected already. So maybe this is the same for the future. So maybe in 2 years, we'll have like super operational based native rollups with ZK VM, which is very close to what you were talking about when you mentioned sharding of the past, with the composability of multiple L2s within this native rollup containers.
I want to believe all of this kind of because kind of like technically it makes sense, right? But kind of we've seen time and time again that the technically best system doesn't always win, right? Kind of like there's other kind of considerations that kind of play into that. And I think the one that people always talk about is Betamax versus VHS, and that was 40 years ago. But I mean, we have more recent ones to kind of 4G standards and so on. So kind of WiMAX was superior to LTE, and LTE still won out. So kind of it's kind of like there's this happens all the time. That kind of like there's some sort of there's a solution that is understood to be the better solution, but the other the alternative still wins out, right? So kind of like if you are in this position where US presidents kind of launch their shitcoins on kind of alternative protocols, does it confer enough gravitas and kind of seriousness to kind of take away from that technically valid claim from Ethereum that kind of it's the best solution? Kind of like how yeah. So yeah.
I think this is exactly where Ethereum wins. I mean, so Ethereum very often will be, maybe people will ask about it's as the most secure solution, but it's maybe rough around the edges on like taking advantage of all the latest developments in like accelerating the blockchain design, because there'll be always some fresh and unburdened systems that will say, oh, we do the more transactions per second. So and then you would say, does it mean that this like best current technology wins, or we are very confident that this is what we all bring to Ethereum with the respect for all the values, because this is how we attract the customers, the users, capital, and so on. So almost you can say this is exactly why Ethereum is winning, because it has the technology that is really caring about the delivery of everything that matters at the speed that we accelerate, we definitely this is our task to improve that efficiency of delivery of the improvements. That if there is a lag between the innovation and adoption to Ethereum of some solutions, that's not a 2 years lag, it's not a 1 year lag, but it's maybe like a few months before we see, oh, this is really functioning and it can go in the next fork or 2 forks from now. But we know that the developer ecosystem, the tooling, the adoption from the financial industry, the adoption of users. So look at recent announcements from the acceleration of WorldCoin users onboarding, Base onboarding a lot of users. Starknet recently showing that game, that Focus Tree, that got like 200,000 users and it's growing in the App Store. Massive success. So all of this shows us like this technology is winning. Like we see the numbers and it's winning, and we have all tools that actually strengthen that and show us that on top of it, we have capacity to compete with any alternative L1. Through those L2s, they can adopt even faster any scaling capacity solutions. They can go to the massively scaled blocks, novel P2P systems, and we bring it also to L1. So I would say that the sharpness of technology, but not in the sense of like security or caring about the values and delivering that promise. This is not draft. This is what we always care about. But this sometimes delay the innovation because you need a bit of verification. Is that maps verified? Is that are those ZK solutions really fine? Will they cause like the massive bug in the that you will have to keep patching, and then you will not even be able to confirm that like everything was fine, right? We've seen it with ZK technology in the past. We have hundreds of researchers and testers and engineers verifying all the claims about all the IPs that go into the system.
If you're kind of championing the L2s in kind of this competition with alternative L1s, how do you see kind of the problem of cross L2 interoperability? So kind of like if currently kind of like I want to exit from Optimism and go to Arbitrum, it'll take me a week, right? Kind of I could probably send a postcard faster. So it's kind of and kind of the varying message standards and so should kind of Ethereum kind of institute a message passing standard, or kind of like a kind of, because kind of one of the core propositions of kind of having L2s is that having L2s on the same L1 is that in principle you can kind of have this cross L2 communication without necessarily kind of going via the L1, right? But we don't see that yet. So kind of we see kind of a number of siloed ecosystems on top of L2, on top of L1 that kind of don't act like a unified ecosystem. So is there a way to kind of make this happen, and if so, make this happen faster?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so there is Open Intents initiative coordinated by Josh Rudolph. We see the fantastic bridging solutions appearing in the Ethereum ecosystem all the time. The fact that we need all that many bridging solutions and that we still don't have one that says like, yeah, this is like globally acceptable and best experience, this remains a challenge. And this is what will be the major coordination and research effort from the foundation. I totally agree with you that this experience is not best yet. I think that probably with the existing bridging solutions, you wouldn't wait a week. It's just that you would sacrifice some of the security assumptions. You would have some third parties providing the temporary custody or some kind of insurance level. So user experience definitely is not on the weak level, but the user experience with the guarantees of Ethereum would be there. And this will be massive effort. And I think there's lots of challenges there. But it also means that, look, these challenges will wait for any other ecosystem, because we expect the growth of the demand to always be beyond of anything that the L1 can deliver, combined with the customization requirements and some kind of control over the chain. That, for example, enterprise, when they like the financial institutions, when they come and they say, we need something where we have more control, and we need the global system where we actually have no control because it's neutral and it's censorship resistant. So this together means that any other ecosystem that will compete with Ethereum will face those challenges sooner or later. And we are spending a lot of effort on this, but it also means that in many ways we are already ahead of others who will face that as well. And I think this is a challenge for other alternative ones. Like they look at Ethereum and they think, all right, consistency, the customers that we are approaching, potential customers that we are approaching, or any institution that we want to invite, they say to us, no, like we use Ethereum because there on Ethereum we feel less like a customer. It's just ours. Like we just take it. So and we can shape it the way we want, and we can participate in global economy. So it's really hard to compete with that when you like want to treat someone as customer, but they say, no, we just want to use the network and get all those network effects. And then they get support from L2s that actually come and treat them as customers, and they say you have everything this together. So massive challenge from us, from L2s, inviting L2s to help us with those interop standards. There are multiple proposals. We see the op interop proposal. We see various like breaches that come like list many. I wouldn't like to start listing because then I'll omit too many. The open intents initiative, the various solutions in the maybe like MEV order flow space, as you see like the Rollup related solutions, and so on and so on. So all of this has to feel unified, and it comes also with tooling like wallets, the user experience. Maybe LLMs will come with help. The account abstraction that is coming to Ethereum came with Impactra and the first solutions, and they'll continue. All of that together, a lot of work, and that's why we talk scaling one and scaling blobs, but also interop and UX. Maybe possibly the biggest challenge of all of them.
Cool. So kind of if you look ahead, I mean, you guys just started. So kind of like if you look ahead 1 year and maybe 5 years, what does success look like for you guys?
So for me, look, my term is 2 years with the foundation, which means that for me, success means that I really show that like within 2 years, we can achieve a lot of things that people are saying that are to be solved now. That if we mention those things like scaling O1, scaling blobs, and improve interop UX, that this within these 2 years, it should be a massive change and a feeling that this really happened. And it means that even if we set the goals, then the success for me means go much beyond those goals, right? That it's really absolute win, a huge impact, a really great vibes between L2s and L1s and everyone in ecosystem. The funds that will deploy $1 trillion level funds on Ethereum, the L1 that everyone is excited about, that it's just like it has such a huge capacity and such a high value set of transactions that it generates massive fees. So all of that together is a success. And beyond that, there's other story for me. This is like 2 years focus, turn around everything that needed attention, make sure that communication on all of this feels great, and then be really happy like to see others to continue.
What about you, Hsiao-Wei?
I think it's for short term, I want Ethereum to be the default choice for all the use cases, including that L2 choose what the L1 is, and then it's from application layer, it's from the institution layer, and then it's from all the builders that they want to build something. They should choose Ethereum because it's the most secure, it's the most robust. This is the best trend they should build on when they choose blockchain technology. Should be the default for them. And I also want to improve the UX in order to for the users that they don't even need to be aware of blockchain exist in the app. So I think it takes some time to improve our wallet systems, and it takes some time to provide a very good pipeline for the dev layer to improve the UX. So, but I think this world won't be too far away.
So if kind of like each of you kind of had to give one number one priority for your term, in kind of like just one, because kind of like we talked about a lot of things. Kind of we talked about scaling block space and blob space and L2 interoperability and user experience and so on. So if it's just one priority, what will you kind of optimize for?
For people to come and see like thousands or millions of applications on Ethereum ecosystem all feeling like one. And
What about you, Hsiao-Wei?
I would say to bring Ethereum alive again.
Good parting words. Thank you both for coming on. We will share kind of like other places you can follow you guys personally and the Ethereum Foundation on Twitter and elsewhere. And thank you so much for stepping up.
Thank you, Frederick. Thank you for having us.
thank you so much. Thank you, Frederica. Yeah, it was a massive pleasure.